I saw tremendous potential here and a community where I felt I could contribute. The hardest thing for me will be that when I drive off the campus for the last time, I have to keep completely clear of the place. What I'm not going to do is go and work as a Vice-Chancellor in another university. I will always be proud to be able to say I'm a member of the Loughborough community. I'm the first person to accept that there will be students who will take recreational drugs. I think a university like Loughborough should set a standard that says this is unacceptable. Why would we want to join a group where we're better than most of them? I trust the students, and I trust the Students' Union to make the right decision. Listen to your students, work with your students, don't put metal railings around them, don't send them home and say we're not holding a graduation ceremony this year, and they will support you and help you do great things. I mean, gee whiz, who wouldn't be proud of something like that?
Well, hello and welcome to this special interview between LSU Media and the Loughborough Vice-Chancellor, Professor Robert Allison, who is leaving us in September after 9 long and very successful years at Loughborough University. Vice-Chancellor, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us in what has no doubt been a busy time for you.
It has. So firstly, Callum, it's nice to see you again, and thank you for those kind words. It has been an incredibly busy year for all sorts of reasons, yes. But I think Loughborough has come through just as you would expect, absolutely on top of things.
We've got a lot to get through, as I'm sure you can imagine, and I'm not even sure the 15 questions that we've got could cover all of it, but hopefully we'll cover the ups and indeed the downs of your time here.
You far away.
Yeah, I'll do my best. We'll come on to how we got to this point shortly, but I'd like to start firstly with back when you started in September 2012. You joined after 6 successful years at Sussex, and you've also been Honorary Secretary of the Royal Geographical Society and worked at Durham. Well, I'm sure you don't mention that too many times.
I saw the light. I left there and came here.
So, and that kind of leads into my first question. When you joined Loughborough, it was kind of a radically different place from what it is now. So what was it that brought you to Loughborough University?
That's a very interesting question. I think because I saw tremendous potential here and a community where I felt I could contribute and work with others, and I mean work with others to make a difference. I mean, you don't go on the journey that Loughborough's been on because you do it by yourself in any role in the university. And it was a very interesting, the process between application and being offered the job was a very interesting journey. And if you'll allow me to do so, I'll tell you a little anecdote. So I left the final interview here, which was just in the Pierce committee room on the other side of the main entrance in this Hazelrig building. And I can remember dashing for the railway train because I had to get back to the south coast. And I sat down on the train as it pulled into Loughborough. I was so close. You know, you see the train coming around the curve from East Midlands Parkway, ran over the bridge, sat down and thought, just calm down between here and Leicester, and as you leave Leicester, turn your phone on and tell people you're on the way home. And I can remember sitting on the train and thinking, if you don't get this job, you're going to be hugely disappointed. But you'll have to dust yourself down, get on with life, and something else will come up. Because this was the first Vice-Chancellor's job I'd pitched in for, having been very kindly invited to look at 1 or 2 others. Just as I was leaving Leicester, I put my phone on and I thought something was wrong with it because it was buzzing. I tell you what, it's a good job I wasn't rude when I picked it up, because in that 12-minute journey and the time it took me to get from here to the railway station in a taxi, they'd made their decision, rang me up and offered me the job. And the reason I felt that, you know, you'll be hugely disappointed, at that point, it wasn't just about being the Vice-Chancellor, although, of course, that was a huge privilege, and it has been, but it's because I wanted it to be Loughborough. And I was the lucky one.
Fantastic. And you mentioned the process you went through there. No doubt you spoke at great length of your predecessor, Dame Shirley and Pierce, who was here for 6 years prior to yourself, and doubtless those conversations were filled with a lot of hopefully very sound advice. What was the best bit of advice that you got from her, and has that held true during your time here?
Shirley was a delight to work with in the transition period. And in fact, one of my responsibilities now, when council has decided who my replacement is going to be, will be to work with that individual in exactly the same way she worked and supported me. I think what I learned from Shirley more than anything else was that Loughborough is a really strong community, and that it's a university that's fairly comfortable in its own skin. I've worked at universities where that wasn't the case. And the other thing which she said, which has absolutely proved to be true, is Loughborough University is one of those places that has a can-do attitude. Even if there's a challenge or a problem, you know, like the last year, well, we'll deal with it. It's not, oh, good, how are we going to deal with this, sackcloth and ashes? It's, let's get on with life, sort this out, and make the best of a situation. She was very gracious in terms of how she supported me between the point that it was announced that I would be taking over from her and her departure. And I hope that I can do the same to support whoever it is that replaces me.
This next question, I think probably we could spend the whole interview chatting about, but if you can try and sum this next question up in 30 seconds, a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Can you sum up what your Loughborough experience has been like?
Yeah, so it's been a huge privilege. It's been really enjoyable. And I've just got so much out of it. I've learned so much. And I hope that people, you, all the students who've been here and my colleagues, and indeed, people out there beyond the campus, feel that I've, in my own way, made a contribution that they can identify with. I will just make one other comment. When you start, there's no book that says how to be a Vice-Chancellor. And I think what I learnt more than anything else is listen to your students and listen to your colleagues. And if you listen and work to support their ambitions and what they see for the university, they'll also work with you. And as a consequence, you'll have success. I mean, look, when I arrived 8 or 9 years ago, our average league table position was number 27th in the UK. We're now in the top 10 in every single league table, and our average position is in the top 5. I mean, gee whiz, who wouldn't be proud of something like that and what that means in terms of achievements?
Absolutely. And one thing that has no doubt been part of that success and was part of Loughborough's success prior to your arrival is Loughborough's sporting prowess. And that has, I see a smile on your face there, and that has only continued whilst you've been in post and has expanded massively. There's been a lot of investment in sporting facilities, the Elite Athlete Centre, the Holywell Stadium, the First 15 rugby pitch changing to 4G, and several other changes. And there are several UK teams that now see Loughborough as a centre of excellence and are based here. How important was it to you coming into the role that the sporting legacy that Loughborough already had continued during your tenure and beyond?
Loughborough, so I wouldn't use the word unique, but there is something here that's really important. And that is wherever I travel around the world to represent the university, Loughborough has an identity. And it's not just sport, but sport's very much at the heart of that. Look at all of the indicators. This isn't just me saying it as VC Bob, but we are the #1 university in the world for sport. Now, that's because of the hugely complex ecosystem here and how it works. But I was aware that what I had a responsibility to do was maintain the importance of that presence and that reputation that we have in sport. To also, while doing that, build in other areas as well. And by sport, it's not just kicking or throwing or running. Of course, all of that's important. But as you've already pointed out, other things which go to make that special. I would also give you two very interesting recollections right from when I started. The first was, the first couple of weekends I'd arrived here, I thought I'll come in at the weekend and I'll just walk around the campus. And I went down to the far end where the stadium is, and you and other students will know there's some beach volleyball courts there. And when I saw that, I can remember saying to myself, my goodness me, they even do beach volleyball at Loughborough. And then the other thing, and this is a really interesting point, Up until the university strategy that Council agreed shortly after I arrived, one of the headlines was never sport. And the reason for that, there was a group of people in the university, not my predecessor, let me make that clear, and not my immediate colleagues such as the provost, but nonetheless there was a group of people who thought that the sporting bit was too in your face. But in my view, is if you have a world-class reputation for it, wouldn't you want to build on that? And what we did for the very first time in the strategy that I worked with people to develop is we had learning and teaching, research, enterprise and sport as our 4 key activities. Prior to that, it had only been those first 3. And with the strategy that's being developed now, which my successor will finally shape before Council approves it, we've got sport as a major theme running through that strategy as well. I mean, if you will class at something, why would you not want to recognise that? Absolutely.
And we mentioned upgrades, and you mentioned the university strategy, and a lot of that has been building work, and that is not just confined to sport. Several buildings have gone up since you started, and campus is very different, no doubt, to when you started. Claudia Parsons, the STEM lab, upgrades to West Park Teaching Hub, and several more, and of course the estates plan means there will be work beyond your departure. Is campus unrecognisable to you now after that work, and will you be almost sad that you're not here to see all of that completed?
So I wouldn't say it's unrecognisable. Of course, Parsons, which you were the first hall chair of, is brand new, but Royce, Faraday, Kaylee have been there for years and years. You've constantly got to evolve. Students expect top-class facilities, so you've constantly got to reflect that. If you want to do world-class research, look at the National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine. That's gone up in my time here. And of course, the other development that we must not forget is Loughborough University London. All of that happened since I've been here. So those developments in terms of assets have been really important. But let's also just remember one other thing. During the last 9 years, one of the things that we've had is Excellence 100. And Excellence 100 was a campaign to recruit 100 new top academics from around the world. And that has been really successful. And this is a really important point, we didn't do that just by increasing the number of students here. Often if universities want to expand, we'll take another 1,000 students because that'll bring in the money. That has not been our approach here. Our approach has been to say we're about the right size and shape, so we're still a community, which the Loughborough family, as the students often call it. So we've diversified our income to grow it so we could make those appointments. The hardest thing for me will be that when I drive off the campus for the last time, I have to keep completely clear of the place. Shirley Pearce, my predecessor, was magnanimous in her support by doing that for me, and I will need to do that for my successor. And that will be very, very hard. One of the things I get most pleasure out of is just walking across the campus, chatting to students, have students stop and chat to me. And that will be something that I very much miss.
And that is something we will most certainly come back to later on. Obviously, we're here today with LSU Media and the wonderful support staff that they have. And the current LSU president, Matt Youngs, is the 9th president of your tenure.
Yeah.
And working with the Students' Union has been a key theme of your vice-chancellorship. How important has LSU been both to the university and to you as a vice-chancellor in creating the Loughborough experience, which we're all so proud of?
So I'll talk about LSU, but I want to talk about one or two other bits as well. I think that we benefit hugely from the relationship between LSU and the university because, of course, as you know, they're legally 2 separate bodies. I, as the Vice-Chancellor, technically have no legal jurisdiction in the Students' Union. That is, whether it's Matt Youngs or whether it's Salome Diori going all the way back to Ellie Reid, who was the first president of the Students' Union that I worked with. That's the students and that's their domain. But I'm in absolutely no doubt that one of the reasons we've had many of the successes that we've had is because of the way in which LSU and the university works together. But then, there's the hall chairs. Halls of residence are really, really important parts of the community here. Look at the number of sabbatical officers in the Students' Union who start life on hall committees. You know that. Look at Loughborough Sport and look at the club captains and the contribution that they make to the place. Look at programme presidents and programme reps. We, the university, let the Students' Union do all the work around electing the students who go into those roles. We don't interfere in that at all, and that's because I trust the students and I trust the Students' Union to make the right decision. And I'll just offer you one final thought. So in my first term here, as you and other students will appreciate, the member of staff here that the two members of staff that I'm closest to are the provost and the chief operating officer. The way the university is structured is I have the privilege of being head of the university. The chief operating officer is responsible to me for all of the operation of the university and the professional services. The provost is responsible to me for all of the academic side of the university. The provost is also the deputy vice-chancellor in my absence. So those two members of staff are very important to me. Towards the end of my first term, one of the things that Chris Linton, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, said to me...
I just hope not.
I'm sure he won't. Said, why are you doing so much work with the students? This was getting to know students, meeting groups of students in my first term. And I said, that's interesting. Why do you ask? And he said, because you're putting far more time into it than Shirley Pearce did. There's no problem with that. Shirley Pearce isn't me. I wasn't Shirley Pearce, and so on and so forth. And I thought, how do you respond to that? So all I said to Chris was, watch and learn. And sometime later, we were having a discussion, and at this point, Ellie Reid had nearly finished her term. She was handing over to Josh Hurrell, the next president of the Students' Union. And I can remember Chris, and we were beginning to have some of the successes that this university has enjoyed because of the way in which we work in the Students' Union. And Chris Linton said, I now know why. Listen to your students, work with your students. Dare I say it, if you think about the news over the last year, don't put metal railings around them. Don't send them home and say, we're not holding a graduation ceremony this year. And they will support you and help you do great things.
Fantastic answer. And as I say, I will touch on that again in a later question. But now on to some more perhaps in-depth topics. And the first, and perhaps possibly more difficult as well, and the first is on drugs. That has been a notable policy during your tenure that has remained quite steadfast, despite criticism from some quarters of campus, which I'm sure you're aware of. I'm conscious that your experiences in both previous roles and in this role have informed that. Why do you feel that your stance is so important, or your stance of a university stance is so important?
I'm the first person to accept that there will be students who are registered here at the moment who will take recreational drugs. I'm aware that occasionally when LSU is open as normal and there are big nights, particularly FND and DNB, which I didn't like at all, and as you will be aware, no longer takes place in the union. It takes place off the campus. You and I know that there is a drug subculture associated with that sort of music and that sort of evening. I just don't think that that is an appropriate part of any civilised society. Are students going to continue to do that sort of thing? Yes, some will, but they need to understand that if they do that, and for want of using any other language, they're caught, there's a price to pay. And there are two things that have informed that. One is very Loughborough, and that is, could you imagine the damage that it would do to this university if either real or perceived there was any link between drugs and sport? Look at Sky and cycling. Look at some of the impact of those people who were training over in the United States, track and field, where whether it was true or not, there was a perceived link between performance-enhancing drugs and the activity. We just can't have anything like that here. And the other thing, and this was early in my career, I can remember attending a memorial service for a young male student who had died in circumstances not unrelated to we're talking about. His mother was truly grief-stricken. I have never seen anybody so beside themselves with grief. And I thought, while it's up to the students, they're over 18, it's, what they do with their life is up to them. I think a university like Loughborough should set a standard that says this is unacceptable, not just because of what it does to that individual, but what it does to the wider family, wider society, wider community within which they're based. And as a consequence, I just think it's totally unacceptable.
I appreciate your honesty. No doubt it's not an easy subject for anyone to talk about. Of course, it's great to hear your views on it. And kind of leading on from that question, I suppose if I asked you what the best moment was, we could be here for a long, long time. Unfortunately, there has been a lot more ups and downs during your tenure here. I certainly hope so anyway. But there have no doubt been disappointments. There have no doubt also been tragic moments. What has been your worst moment as Vice-Chancellor?
I can tell you now, without thinking. Some years ago, I was literally walking out of a graduation ceremony, and very unusually, never happened before, as I walked literally out through the door, the head of security stopped me and said, "Vice-Chancellor, I've been asked to tell you need to go to your office straight away." And I said, "Okay, just let me go and take my robes off." And he said, "No, I'm here to take your robes. Someone will take you over now." So my robes were duly taken off. I left David Wallace Sports Hall, started to walk back over to this building here, and stopped momentarily because someone wanted a word. And the colleague from security who was walking with me said, "I'm really sorry, Vice-Chancellor, you need to go to your office straight away." I went upstairs. We had been rung by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to say that a Loughborough student was on flight MH17, which you'll remember was shot down over the Ukraine. And the reason he was on that flight was he was going out to the University of Western Australia in Perth for a placement. And at that point, they couldn't contact his parents. And I can remember being totally stunned. And it was a very, very difficult moment. And the reason that will always be the hardest moment was how we had to deal with that on a day of celebration. The fact that we had to then contact his parents, and there are reasons behind that, which I won't bore you with in detail. But let me also indicate the significance of the university. So, of course, the student was called Ben. I know his mum and dad very well now. And they come to the university every single year on Remembrance Day because we hold a little service in the Wall Garden. You know, we've got a Wall Garden, and I'd encourage every student, if they've never been, to go and have a quick look. You know, around the wall are plaques of students or members of staff, or it's a sort of memorial garden. And I can remember about 3 or 4 years after Ben tragically lost his life, saying to his mum and dad, "It's very, very good of you to come here every year." So they said, "Well, this is how we remember him. There is no grave." And I thought, and I said, "That's interesting." They said the university meant everything to him. And that also brought home for me all the more the tragedy that he should have lost his life like that. And nonetheless, as you can tell, it stuck in my mind very much. But I think it's a huge honour and a privilege for every member of the university community to know that the thing that is uppermost in his mum and dad's minds was his time at Loughborough and how much he enjoyed it, because this is the point, in this country where they come on that particular day always to remember him.
And just a question kind of veered off, and kind of a sub-question from that. Unfortunately, you have experienced before the loss of a student, which as a Vice-Chancellor, I'm sure, both personally and professionally, as someone with a duty of care, that hits you very hard. Absolutely. But of course, the university, life goes on, and the university still needs running. How have you picked yourself up from those moments, and also how do you pick campus up, essentially? How do you pick the university up again whilst dealing with that grief yourself to keep going?
That's an interesting question. So I think what's really important is that we offer the students who need it help and support without crowding them out. Let me also say, I think that the students themselves are hugely good to each other, and really you see students at their best when there are very tricky moments, and the students support each other. I think the bit for me that helps me move on. So while I've not managed to do every single one of them, because on one or two occasions, for example, I've been overseas, if a student loses their life while they're at the university, or a member of staff dies while they're in what you call in the service of the university, either an employee, I always try and go to the funeral. And what's really important at those moments, so if I take Ben, he was he played ultimate frisbee for the university. And what's really important is that you remember the contribution they made and they celebrate that, because in death, there's something about celebrating the success and the contribution that someone has made to the place as well.
This is fantastic to hear such insight on such a tragic incident. Has there been anything, whilst no doubt the university has achieved, countless accolades whilst you've been here, has there been anything that you regret or wish you had the chance to do, something that you think, I really would have liked to have done that and we've kind of missed out on that, or something that you have done and look back and think could have done that differently in hindsight?
So in terms of things that I might have done that I didn't do, one of the things that has been one of my biggest frustrations and disappointments over the last 12 months is that all of the sorts of things that I really enjoy doing, awards nights in the Students' Union, standing on the touchline and watching women play hockey, standing at the edge of the 4G that you mentioned earlier and watching either Loughborough Lightning or men play rugby. I hugely regret and miss not having been able to do that. And part of me wondered whether, when I decided I ought to step down, whether I ought to stay for a further year, because that will all come back. And I thought, no, what's really important is you make a decision because of the role that I have in a point in time that's right for the university, not just because it's right for you. So I regret all that. The other thing that I probably wish we could have got going on, which we haven't, because current financial circumstances don't allow it, is replacing the Students' Union with a new building. We started talking about that 3 or 4 years ago. And had we been in normal life, we would have started building a new Students' Union, not last September, but the September beforehand. And at the moment, we're absolutely fine financially, but the whole what we call capital programme, we have put no new buildings up for 2 years now, or we've started no new building projects. What's been more important is to pay staff salaries and protect the quality of the student experience in as much as we can. And I really regret we've not been able to start work on a new Students' Union, because I think that students here, that Students' Union was built when, early 1970s, I can't remember when, but the students here really deserve a Students' Union that's fit for the 21st century. And even Matt Young's president of the Students' Union would agree with me that that building is past its sell-by date. We'll get there, but I'm disappointed we weren't able to start it under my watch.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in that question the havoc, I suppose, that coronavirus has caused, both on a personal and professional level. First years have missed out on freshers. The first years still haven't been on, for example, to an FND in the Students' Union building. Students on placement are working from home on placements. Students in second year have had necessarily placements cancelled. And finalists, including myself last year, still haven't had their graduation in their last few months, but I will. And finalists... And
I could name some universities, and if you were...
Yes, I was going to say, I know a few. But finalists, both last year and this year, have had their kind of last year gone essentially from COVID in the way that they're accustomed to it, as have yourself. But the university has responded to coronavirus as it has had to. What are your reflections and emotions about the university and Loughborough family's response to the coronavirus pandemic?
So I think it comes back to something I said earlier about a can-do attitude. And the other thing I'm a great believer in, that we respond by really pushing the boundaries. But in return, the reason we can do that is because the students have behaved so superbly. I mean, let me give you a couple of examples. 2 weeks ago, because we, like you see on national television, get data in arrears. 2 weeks ago, the response rate of students already back at university to the request that they had a COVID-19 lateral flow test once a week, nationally, the average, can you believe it, was less than 10%.
Crikey.
On this campus, it was 116%. In other words, every single student had had a test, or pretty much every single student, and some had been twice. The last, what's the data? Well, I can tell you, for 2 weeks ago, that was 9,000 tests, and of those 9,000 tests, there were only 3 positives, and those 3 positives were all from students who just returned. So we were able to self-isolate them before there was any cross-infection. So as of this moment, there is no infection on this campus. And it's the same with staff. Staff are doing the same thing. I have a test every Monday morning at 8:30, despite having had my first vaccination. So the point is, if the community responds like that, as a result, you can start playing sport again. You can begin to open up the Students' Union. I'll say now, I am hugely disappointed at the government in terms of saying that for certain courses, in-person teaching can't start until the 17th of May. Why? Now, if you look at the figures across the country as a whole, you might say that that's the right approach. But I do not believe that in higher education, you should bring the entire system down to the lowest common denominator. What you should do is recognise the response that students at this university have made and give them the opportunity to do things because of how they're protecting themselves and the wider community that wouldn't be reflected in some other university where the students can't even be bothered to have a test. But it's also about how you respond. So, for example, for all students in university residence, if they wish to do so, we are going to let them stay on beyond the end of term free, probably for about 10 days. Why? Well, because at the moment, if the government sticks to its roadmap, all restrictions come off 3 or 4 days before the end of term. Students' Union will be able to hold 3 FNDs and they'll be able to hold 3 HAUs. And halls of residence will be able to have balls. We're going to hire a huge marquee, and believe me, it is a huge marquee. So halls can have their balls, and sports clubs and societies can. It's about saying to the students, in return for everything that you've done to keep the community safe, we're going to push the boundaries and you can do this and do that and do the other. We're not going to break the law. That is not something that we should be doing. But what we are going to be doing is challenging the rules where we can, if we feel and if I feel Loughborough students deserve it.
And you mentioned Loughborough students there, and you've spoken throughout this interview about essentially the power of students and also the power of staff. And the university has invested in that with programmes like Athena Swan, the Excellence 100, as you referenced earlier. And you're a very public Vice-Chancellor. Certainly while I've been here, you always have been. You know, you're regularly joined on Pride marches, awards evenings, things like that. You're more than happy to get involved. As a Vice-Chancellor, of course, you direct and you lead the university. How much of the student energy and the staff energy on this campus, how much benefit has that given to you during your tenure?
It's been one of the things that really motivates you. I mean, you know, hearing that you've won bucks again, you know, playing MIT at lacrosse and beating them, playing the University of Queensland at rugby and beating them. In 1 year, 12 students in engineering, 8 of which were women, stunning achievement, They won 12 of the something like 22 prizes that the Royal Academy of Engineering have on offer each year to final year students. So whether it's, look at RAG. Every year, notwithstanding the last 12 months, £1 million for charity. Action. The only university in the country, and I ought to say the only students' union in the country, to win a Queen's Award for volunteering. Those are really, really proud moments. Now, I'm also really proud when some of my colleagues win really prestigious prizes for their research, and some have won very prestigious prizes. At the moment, I have a colleague in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities who has the largest single grant DFID has ever awarded, £40 million, for work in countries in the south around working to achieve net zero. Mm-hmm. Those sorts of things are great moments. Why? So one of the questions that one or two people have said to me is, what advice will you give to your successor? And my comment is, I'm not going to give them any advice. I'm the last person to tell them how to do the job. But I do mentor one or two other vice-chancellors in other universities who were recently into post. And one of the things I say is, you need to work out what you believe your role is. I believe my role is to do my best to create an environment on our two campuses where our students can excel and our staff can excel. And the way in which you do that is you meet your students, you get involved with them and you listen to them, and you do the same with your colleagues. If I can be a catalyst that means the students can get the very best out of their time here and staff can do the very best either in their teaching or their research, whatever it is, then my view is that's my principal role. Other vice-chancellors might have a different view, but as a consequence of that, I like to be out and about meeting and listening to people because it helps me understand what I've got to do in my role.
Of course, and those guiding themes have no doubt been the drivers behind the success that both yourself and this university have had. And I mentioned at the start of the interview that we'd get to this point where we are today. Looking back to almost 9 years ago now when you started, what did you, of course, I'm sure you weren't planning this exact interview 9 years ago, but back to when you started.
I'm not letting you come.
I was going to say.
How old were you 9 years ago?
How old was I? I would have been 14.
There you go, you were still in shorts.
Yeah, still am. That's why I grew.
And flip-flops.
That's why I grew the beard. But looking back to where you started, what did you want to have achieved by this point? Have you surpassed it? Have you reached what you wanted to achieve? Did you have any goals or aspirations?
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. So let me give you three things. The first, because it was part of my interview, I can remember to this day the lay member of council that asked me the question. Very, very able individual called Jim Murphy, who was a huge supporter of the university. And he was on my final interview committee, and he said, we're currently in the high 20s in the league tables. If you become Vice-Chancellor, by the time you leave, where will you be? And I said, we'll be in the top 10. And he said, why do you say top 10? Why not top 5? And I said, because the work I've done in preparation for this interview makes me genuinely believe we can be in the top 10. We might get into the top 5, but Oxford, Cambridge, the moment we're ahead of them in a league table, people will say the league tables are false. Imperial, Edinburgh, let's be realistic. But if I look at it, Bristol, Leeds, Birmingham, Nottingham, these were all universities that were ahead of us. UCL, Imperial, St Andrews. I said, with a fair wind behind us, we can, if we do the right thing, beat all of those. Now, are league tables important? We don't do what we do because of league tables. We do what we do and the league tables are there. But if we're getting it right, the league tables provide some sort of independent verification that we're not too far off the plot. So I said, if we can get into the top 5, it would be nice, but I don't believe in setting unrealistic goals. Top 10 will be hard work, but if we can get there, look where we've ended up. So that was number one. Number two is answer to council, the university's governing body. And my boss, so to speak, is the chair of council. For most of my time, Sir Peter Bonfield, a Loughborough graduate, has had a hugely successful career. Since the beginning of 2021, Christine Hodgson, a Loughborough graduate, hugely successful career. But on my first meeting with Sir Peter, he said, one of the things I want you to do is increase Loughborough's international presence and profile. We're not known well enough around the world. That's why I've done quite a lot of international travel, constantly knocking on the doors of government. I mean, once I'm finished this interview with you today, at 11:30, I've got a meeting with the Chinese ambassador down in London about some of the stuff with specific regard to Chinese students and how we're supporting Chinese students, and some things that politely I'm going to say I want him to do for us in terms of making sure that they're all feeling wanted and loved, particularly those who haven't been able to get here. So I think I'm pleased now that our international presence and how we're known, not just in this country, around the world, has definitely grown. I mean, if you were to come up to my office now, on my desk, I have a letter from the government of Sri Lanka asking whether we could support them and give them advice and guidance on improving sport in their country. We wouldn't have received a letter like that 8 or 9 years ago.
Absolutely.
So there are things like that where we've achieved what I wanted to achieve. Then there are some, if I just add one final comment, there are some things that have come with challenges, or they have produced challenges. So here's a really interesting one. I've been in post for 2 weeks, and the provost says to me, we've under-recruited by 300 undergraduates. So that's between £2.5 and £3 million. So I let the chair of council know, and the chair of council says to me, what are you going to do about it? Remember, I've been here for 2 weeks. And I said, we'll manage it this year by tightening our belts. And if we have not come up to number next year, we'll have to restructure to take some money out. Now, number one, Sir Peter Bonfield said, OK, that's fine. You're the Vice-Chancellor. He could have said, well, you've only been here 2 weeks. I'm not sure I like the sound of that. He was very good. He supported me. We got to the end of that year. We changed how we do open days. Look at open days and how we do them now in the real world. You've been involved in some of them. As of the last year, when we had full statistics, for the total number of students that we wanted to recruit, we had the best part of 50,000 applications. Our open days regularly have between 15 and 20,000 people attending them. When I arrived at Loughborough, on average, there are variations, but on average, the A-level grades needed to get into Loughborough were somewhere between 2 Bs and a C and a B and 2 Cs. It's now 2 As and a B. Now, there's a challenge with that, because as the academic standard has improved, one of the things we don't compromise is, well, you're a really good rugby player, so we'll forget your A-level grades. We don't do that. If you lose your academic standards, you're on a hiding to nothing. People occasionally say to me, what should a Vice-Chancellor be responsible for? Academic standards, whether it's in research or learning and teaching. But as a consequence, there are some students 8 or 9 years ago who'd have got into Loughborough and they don't get in now. And the result is Bucks has become a bit more of a challenge. We're still winning it, and we're still going to win it. But that is a really good example of a law of unintended consequences, where because of changes over here, we've also had to work hard over here in a way that we weren't anticipating.
And you mentioned academic achievement there. My next question actually was, what is your tip for the new Vice-Chancellor? However, you mentioned you're not going to give them advice, so I'll skip over that. But what you mentioned A-level grades there. Yeah. I remember David Norton, the head of undergraduate recruitment, openly told me that I was very lucky to get in on my A-level grades, and to be fair, I scraped in.
Well, you're lucky. I probably wouldn't have got in at all.
Well, yeah. Loughborough has never been, and certainly as far as I'm aware, will not be a Russell Group university, and that is kind of part of its identity, not as an outlier in the higher rankings of the league tables, but that is something that was always, certainly when I was coming on open days, it was something like we still achieve all of this, but we're not a Russell Group university compared to the top 10. What is it about Loughborough that makes it stand out from, obviously, you've got Oxford and Cambridge, you've got obviously such history and other fantastic universities in there. What is it to you that makes Loughborough stand out from that top 10?
It's the sense of community. I think it's the collegiality. I've already mentioned the can-do attitude. And I think it's the way in which the community here works and pulls together. It's interesting, your comments about the Russell Group. If you look at all the indicators, we're in the top quartile of the Russell Group. The interesting question, if I was to perhaps be a little cheeky, would be to say, why would we want to join a group where we're better than most of them? Now, my successor may have a different view. And at the end of the day, it's a council decision if the opportunity came, and it will be beyond my time here. I think what's really at the heart of this, though, is, well, here's a really interesting one. Let me ask you a question, and you've got to give me an answer within 5 seconds. How many universities are there in the Russell Group? The answer is you don't know. Yeah, that's right. Now, if I was to say to you, is Cambridge a member of the Russell Group, or is Oxford, or is Imperial? Of course you'd say yes. But the point is, there are a whole load of universities which are members of the Russell Group, and you don't actually know which they are. So my approach has always been, have an identity, be proud of what you are as an institution, not because you're part of a group, and make that work for you. And I believe we've achieved that at Loughborough, and that's what we will certainly continue to do for the immediate future.
Perfect.
Or at least until I've left.
Yeah, and no doubt. I mean, we've got what? So you mentioned your final day is July.
Yeah, end of July.
And then you've got the graduation ceremonies.
Yeah.
Following that, and no doubt the kind of 3 or so months left will be just as busy as all the ones that have come before it. But after that, what is next for you?
I'm going to become a Kinch bus driver. Because I can keep an
Will you
eye
be on time?
Because I can keep an eye on the students with none of the responsibility. No, that's not true. Apologies to Kinch bus drivers. I'd be terrible. So, to begin with, I mean, I have had some hugely helpful advice from people like Barry Eccleston. Who's Barry Eccleston? He's a Loughborough graduate who went on in his career to be one of the most senior members of staff in Airbus. Sir Peter Bonfield, Chair of Council. I mean, look at him. He's been on the main board of Sony. He was Chief Exec of BT. And what everyone has said to me is, I've had varying advice, but people of that quality have said 2 things. Number one is just take some time out to wind down. So I'll do that. And number 2 is don't jump at the first opportunity that comes along. Bide your time and wait for the right thing. Don't be worried that something won't come along. The only thing I've decided is what I'm not going to do is go and work as a Vice-Chancellor in another university. If I'd wanted to do that, all other things being equal through appointing processes, I could have done that on a number of occasions. I personally believe that when Loughborough appointed me to my role here, it was a huge privilege. And I'm not just saying that because you're interviewing me, Callum, it was. And if you do the job of Vice-Chancellor in the way your students can reasonably expect you to do, and the way in which your colleagues will want to see you doing it, you do it with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your energy and mind. And as a consequence, you won't want to be a Vice-Chancellor somewhere else. That's my view anyway. So I need to go on and look for something else. I've been saying to 1 or 2 people, at long last, I've got to leave university and go and find a job. But alas, I won't be graduating with a Loughborough degree, but nonetheless, it's still been a huge privilege to be here.
I was going to say, I've said to you before, obviously, you left university, just studied at King's College London.
I did my PhD at King's. I was an undergraduate at Hull. Funnily enough, I never applied to go to university. I wasn't going to go to university, but then geography just gripped me. And very kindly, when I got a set of A-level results that were rather better than I think anyone had anticipated, my mum lent me her car, so I scooted around one or two universities, did my undergraduates at Hull, and will be always grateful to them for letting me in at the very late stage. Then moved to King's College London to do my PhD, and then have worked in, as you've already pointed out, so Durham, UCL, Sussex, and then finally, as I've said previously, I saw the light and came to Loughborough.
I dare say, seeing as you've stayed in the sector, you are always a student at heart, and arguably always will be. But when you wake up, let's say on the 1st of August, and this is the final question, it's been brilliant to hear your thoughts.
That's very kind,
during your 9 years, you've made sure that Loughborough's success, which is no doubt a great source of pride for you,
it is, yeah.
Loughborough can continue to grow and succeed without Bob. But what does Bob's life look like without Loughborough?
So I think, to begin with, I will find it very hard because the university's been so much a part of my life, and I've enjoyed so much the opportunities that have been given to me. I must, beyond any shadow of doubt, give my successor space. I am sure that when it's appropriate for she or him to do so, because at the moment, as you may be aware, there's been no final interviews, and I don't know who it is who is in the frame. It's inappropriate for me to know. But just as once bit of time had lapsed, I was delighted to welcome Shirley Pearce back to the campus. Her predecessor, David Wallace, continues to come back to the campus. If I'm invited to do so in an appropriate way, of course, I'll be delighted to come back here. But as a guest and as a visitor, and maybe in a little sort of way in that sense, as a member of the wider Loughborough family that you've occasionally heard me talk about. But the point is, I will always be proud to be able to say I'm a member of that wider Loughborough community.
Vice Chancellor, as I say, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you and to hear your reflections from what's been a very busy time that you've had here. Of course, I'm sure I speak for all students when I say I wish you all the best when the time comes, and we hope to see you back on campus as a guest visitor or otherwise in the near future. That concludes our interview today. We appreciate you watching, and we hope to see you again soon.